The sharp crack of knuckles against bone echoed through the stifling heat of the mess hall. Lieutenant Caldwell sneered, convinced he had just disciplined a defiant civilian contractor. He didn't know the quiet woman wiping blood from her split lip was a Navy SEAL. His absolute nightmare had just begun. The sun over Camp Lemonnier, Djibouti, was utterly merciless. It beat down on the corrugated metal roofs and baked the dust into a fine, choking powder that clung to everything. For the personnel stationed at the primary base of operations for U.S. Africa Command, the heat was a constant, oppressive enemy. But for Chief Petty Officer Sarah Jenkins, the sweltering temperature was nothing compared to the hell she had just walked out of. Sarah was a ghost in the conventional military machine. Officially, women had been integrated into combat roles years prior. But the SEAL teams remained one of the most impenetrable brotherhoods on the planet. Sarah hadn't just knocked on the door. She had kicked it off its hinges, surviving the grueling attrition of basic underwater demolition/SEAL BUD/training and earning her trident. Now attached to a highly classified Tier 1 element operating out of the Horn of Africa, her existence was buried under layers of redactions and non-disclosure agreements. She didn't wear rank insignia. She didn't wear a NAMA tape. Most days, she didn't even wear a uniform. After a 72-hour kinetic operation in the lawless Badlands of Somalia, an op involving hostage recovery, 3 firefights and 0 sleep, Sarah was running on pure adrenaline and caffeine. She was dressed in sterile desert tactical pants, battered Salomon boots, and a plain olive drab t-shirt soaked through with sweat. She looked like just another private military contractor or low-level intelligence analyst. She certainly didn't look like an operator who could dismantle a room full of armed insurgents in under 30 seconds. She walked into the base galley, a massive, air-conditioned tent bustling with sailors, Marines, and civilian staff. All she wanted was a styrofoam cup of black coffee and a corner to stare at the wall until her nervous system down-regulated. Enter Lieutenant Gregory Caldwell. Caldwell was a logistics officer attached to a visiting carrier strike group. He was the kind of officer who wore his rank not as a responsibility, but as a crown. His uniform was crisp, his boots were polished to a mirror shine, and his combat deployment experience consisted entirely of organizing spreadsheets in air-conditioned command centers. He thrived on enforcing petty regulations and demanding the utmost deference from anyone he deemed beneath him. Sarah stood near the coffee dispensers, eyes half closed, waiting for the dark liquid to fill her cup. She was dead to the world, her mind still replaying the echoes of suppressed gunfire and the smell of cordite. Caldwell marched toward the dispensers, flanked by 2 junior sailors, Petty Officer First Class Miller and Seaman Recruit Davis. Caldwell was talking loudly, pontificating about supply chain inefficiencies, when he cut directly in front of Sarah. He didn't look, didn't care, and expected the sea of lower-ranking personnel to simply part for his silver bars. His elbow caught Sarah's forearm just as her cup was full. The scalding black coffee splashed over her hand and down the front of her olive t-shirt. Sarah let out a soft hiss of breath, setting the cup down on the metal counter. She didn't shout. She didn't curse. She just reached for a stack of brown paper napkins to wipe the boiling liquid off her skin. Caldwell stopped, looking down at his sleeve. A single drop of coffee had speckled his pristine desert camouflage uniform. His face immediately darkened into a scowl. "Watch where you're standing, contractor," Caldwell snapped, his voice loud enough to turn heads in the immediate vicinity. Sarah paused, a napkin pressed to her chest. She looked at him, her eyes cold, slate gray, and utterly exhausted, locking onto his. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low and even. "I said, watch where you're standing," Caldwell repeated, puffing out his chest. He looked her up and down, noting the lack of rank, the scruffy appearance, and the dirt-smudged face. "You spilled coffee on a commissioned officer. I expect an apology, and I expect it right now." Sarah took a slow, deliberate breath. Her SEAL training had taught her to compartmentalize. Anger was a useless emotion in a gunfight, and it was equally useless here. This man was a nuisance, not a threat. "You bumped into me, Lieutenant," Sarah replied calmly, tossing the soaked napkins into a nearby trash can. "I'm just trying to get my coffee." She turned to pour herself another cup. To Caldwell, this quiet dismissal was the ultimate insult. In his world, a lack of overt subservience was a direct challenge to his authority. "Hey, turn around when I'm speaking to you." Caldwell barked, stepping closer. The chatter in that corner of the mess hall began to die down. Dozens of eyes turned toward the commotion. Petty Officer Miller shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that his lieutenant was escalating a trivial situation, but bound by rank to remain silent. Sarah filled her cup, put a plastic lid on it, and finally turned to face him. "Lieutenant, with all due respect, I've had a very long week. I am not looking for a problem. Have a good day." She stepped to his right, intending to walk past him toward the exit. "I didn't dismiss you," Caldwell hissed, stepping into her path and blocking her. "I demand to know who you work for. What is your contracting agency? I'll have your supervisor on the phone in 5 minutes, and you'll be on the next C-130 out of Djibouti. Name an agency, now." Sarah stared at him. She calculated the distance between them, the angle of his chin, the shifted weight on his back foot. It was instinct. She couldn't help it. Her brain automatically mapped out 5 different ways to break him before he could hit the floor. But she was a professional. "My chain of command is not something you are cleared to know, Lieutenant Caldwell," Sarah said, reading his NAMA tape. "Now please step aside." The phrase "not cleared to know" hit Caldwell like a physical blow. His ego, already fragile, shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces of pure, unadulterated rage. "Not cleared?" Caldwell sneered, his voice trembling with indignation. "I am a commissioned officer in the United States Navy. You are an unkempt, insubordinate civilian who thinks she can walk around this base like she owns it." "I never said I was a civilian," Sarah replied softly. Caldwell didn't process the words. He was too far gone, blinded by the perceived humiliation in front of the enlisted sailors watching the exchange. He reached out and grabbed Sarah's left arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. "You are going to stand at attention, and you are going to—" Before Caldwell could finish his sentence, Sarah reacted. It wasn't a strike. It was an evasion technique, executed with terrifying fluid speed. She dropped her center of gravity, rotated her shoulder, and applied a microsecond of counter-pressure to his thumb joint. Caldwell's grip broke instantly, and he stumbled forward, completely off balance, nearly crashing into the coffee counter. A collective gasp rippled through the galley. Someone laughed. Caldwell caught himself on the steel counter, his face flushed crimson, the veins in his neck bulging against his collar. He had been embarrassed. A woman and nobody had just made a fool of him in front of his subordinates. The psychological dam broke. Logic and military bearing completely abandoned him. Caldwell spun around, raising his right hand. With all the force his humiliation could muster, he threw a brutal backhanded strike. The back of his knuckles slammed into the left side of Sarah's jaw with a sickening crack. Time seemed to freeze in the galley. The clattering of silverware stopped. The hum of conversation vanished, leaving only the drone of the air conditioning units. Petty Officer Miller's eyes went wide with horror. Striking anyone unprovoked was a career-ending offense. Striking a woman was a fast track to a court-martial. But what terrified the onlookers the most wasn't the strike itself. It was Sarah's reaction. She didn't fall. She didn't stumble. She barely even flinched. Her head snapped slightly to the right from the impact, and then slowly, methodically, she turned her face back to look at him. A thin trail of crimson blood began to pool at the corner of her mouth, trickling down her chin. She lifted a thumb and casually wiped it away, staring at the dark red smear on her skin. She tasted copper. Inside Sarah's mind, a switch flipped. The fatigue vanished, replaced by a hyper-focused icy clarity. The odor loop observe, orient, decide. Act was spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. Observe, threat has initiated physical violence. Threat is untrained, emotional, unbalanced. Orient, multiple witnesses. Base galley. Cameras in the corners. Cover identity still intact. Decide retaliation will blow cover and compromise the task force's presence. Let the enemy destroy himself. Act, stand down. Sarah looked into Caldwell's eyes. Caldwell was breathing heavily, his knuckles throbbing. He expected her to cry, to scream, or to cower. Instead, he found himself staring into the abyss. Sarah's eyes were utterly devoid of fear, anger, or shock. They were the eyes of an apex predator observing a cornered rat. It was a look that had terrified hardened terrorists in the darkest corners of the globe. For a fleeting second, a cold shard of genuine terror pierced Caldwell's ego. He realized on a primal level that the woman standing in front of him could kill him with her bare hands. But his arrogance quickly suppressed his survival instinct. He had to save face. He had crossed the Rubicon. That, Caldwell shouted, his voice cracking slightly, is what happens to insubordinate trash on my base. You assault an officer, you get put down. Sarah didn't speak. The silence was deafening, a weapon far more potent than any word she could have shouted. She simply memorized the contours of his face, the sound of his voice, and the silver bar on his chest. Miller! Davis! Caldwell barked, pointing a trembling finger at Sarah. Go get the Master-at-Arms. Get the MPs down here right now. This woman is under arrest for assaulting a naval officer. Amimi. Petty Officer Miller stood frozen, stammering. Sir, she didn't assault you, sir. She just... Are you questioning a direct order, Petty Officer? Caldwell roared, spit flying from his lips. Get the MPs now, or I'll have you thrown in the brig with her. Davis bolted toward the exit, terrified of his unhinged superior. Sarah finally moved. She didn't lunge for him. She reached down, picked up her plastic lid from the counter, snapped it onto her coffee cup, and took a sip. The hot liquid stung her split lip, but her expression never changed. You're making a catastrophic mistake, Lieutenant, Sarah whispered. Her voice was quiet, raspy, but it carried perfectly to his ears. We'll see about that when you're in handcuffs, Caldwell sneered, backing away slightly, instinctively creating distance between himself and the terrifying calm radiating from her. Sarah turned her back on him, a profound display of disrespect, and began walking toward the rear exit of the galley. Hey, you stay right here, Caldwell yelled. You are not dismissed. You are under arrest. Sarah ignored him. She pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped back out into the blistering African heat, the sunlight swallowing her whole. Caldwell stood in the galley, chest heaving, looking around at the stunned faces of the enlisted personnel. He adjusted his collar, trying to project authority. Let that be a lesson, he announced to the room, though his voice lacked its previous bravado. Nobody disrespects the uniform. But the silence that answered him wasn't one of respect. It was one of pity. The sailors in the room didn't know who the woman was, but they knew what they had just witnessed. They had seen a ghost take a hit and walk away without a flinch. 10 minutes later, 2 heavily armed Master-at-Arms arrived at the galley, out of breath and looking for a suspect. Caldwell eagerly gave them a physical description, a highly fabricated account of the altercation, and demanded they lock down the base until she was found. As the MPs jogged off to begin their manhunt, Lieutenant Gregory Caldwell allowed himself a smug smile. He had asserted his dominance. He had protected his honor. He believed he had won. He had no idea that halfway across the base, in a windowless, heavily fortified secure compartment, Chief Petty Officer Sarah Jenkins was sitting down in front of a commanding officer who wore an eagle on his collar and a sealed trident on his chest. And he had no idea that the storm he had just summoned was going to wipe his entire career off the map. Deep within the bowels of Camp Lemonnier, past 3 layers of biometric security and armed sentries, sat the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. Inside the SIS-5, the air was frigid, the hum of server racks was a constant drone, and the walls were lined with screens displaying satellite feeds of the Horn of Africa. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Jenkins badged through the heavy steel door, the red light flashing green as the heavy magnetic locks disengaged. She stepped into the briefing room, tossing her coffee cup into a bin. At the head of a large conference table stood Captain Richard Hayes, the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Task Group Horn of Africa. Hayes was a veteran of Operation Neptune Spear and a legend within the community. He was built like a cinder block and possessed a demeanor that was perpetually calm, yet terrifyingly intense. Beside him was Chief Warrant Officer Thomas Bradley, an intelligence specialist analyzing drone footage from Sarah's recent raid in Mogadishu. Hayes looked up from the maps as Sarah walked in, his eyes, trained to catch the smallest anomalies in hostile environments, immediately locked onto her face. The left side of her jaw was already swelling, a deep, angry purple blossoming beneath the skin. The dried blood on her chin was a stark contrast to her pale, dust-covered face. "Debrief is in 5, Chief," Hayes said, his voice a low gravel. "But first, you want to tell me what happened to your face. You didn't have that when you stepped off the Black Hawk 30 minutes ago." Sarah took a seat, pulling a classified after-action folder toward her. "Ran into a door, sir. A very loud, very angry logistics door in the main galley." Hayes stopped writing. He slowly put his pen down. Bradley looked up from his monitors, an eyebrow raised. In the tight-knit world of Tier 1 operators, nobody just runs into a door on a secure base. "Explain," Hayes demanded, leaning forward. Sarah kept her eyes on the folder, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "A visiting logistics officer, a Lieutenant Caldwell, walked into me and spilled coffee on himself. He demanded to know my contracting agency. I refused to provide it. He attempted to physically restrain me. I broke his grip, and he retaliated with a backhand strike to my jaw. I disengaged and left the area to avoid compromising my cover identity and the task force's presence." The silence in the SIF was absolute. Bradley stopped typing. Hayes stared at her, his jaw muscle twitching. "He hit you," Hayes repeated, the words cold and methodical. A commissioned logistics officer struck a SEAL Chief Petty Officer unprovoked in the middle of the mess hall. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "He also ordered the Master-at-Arms to initiate a base-wide manhunt to arrest me for assault." Hayes didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. The rage of a SEAL captain was a quiet, surgical thing. He turned his head slightly toward the intelligence officer. "Tom, get into the base security network. I want the galley feeds from the last 20 minutes. Every angle. And I want this Lieutenant Caldwell's personnel file on my desk in 60 seconds. "Already on it, boss," Bradley said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Meanwhile, on the other side of the base, Lieutenant Gregory Caldwell was holding court in the wardroom. He had a fresh cup of coffee and was recounting the story to a captive audience of junior officers. In his version of the tale, Sarah was a deranged, muscular mercenary who had aggressively attacked him, forcing him to employ a tactical strike to subdue her before she fled in terror. His moment of glory was interrupted by the arrival of 2 military police officers. Lieutenant Caldwell, the lead MP, asked, looking frustrated. "Sir, we've locked down the gates and swept the civilian quarters. We checked the manifests for KBR, Academy, and CAE. We have no record of a female contractor matching your description on this base. We think she might be a phantom, sir, or covert." Caldwell scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Nonsense. She's probably hiding in the motor pool. Keep looking. I want her in irons before sundown." Just then, a Marine corporal jogged into the wardroom, coming to a sharp halt in front of Caldwell. "Lieutenant Caldwell, sir, you are ordered to report to the base commander's office immediately." Caldwell's chest swelled. He looked around at the other officers with a smug grin. "Well, gentlemen, it seems Captain Pearson has heard about the incident. I expect the base commander wants to personally assure me that security protocols are being tightened." He adjusted his collar, grabbed his cover, and marched out, fully expecting a commendation. He had no idea he was walking straight into an execution. The antechamber to Base Commander Captain David Pearson's office was dead quiet. Caldwell strode in with his chin held high, ready to accept the apologies of the base command staff. He gave the secretary a crisp nod and stepped through the heavy oak doors into the main office. He stopped dead in his tracks. The room was not set up for a friendly chat. Captain Pearson, a stern-faced surface warfare officer, sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his hands steepled together. He did not look happy. Standing to the right of the desk was Captain Richard Hayes. Caldwell didn't recognize Hayes, but he immediately recognized the special warfare insignia on his uniform and the dangerous predatory stillness in his posture. And standing perfectly at parade rest in the corner of the room was Sarah. But she wasn't wearing the sweat-soaked t-shirt and tactical pants anymore. She was dressed in crisp, immaculate Navy working uniform Type 3 camouflage. On her collar gleamed the fouled anchors of a chief petty officer, and pinned securely above her left breast pocket, shining under the fluorescent lights, was the golden eagle, anchor and trident of a Navy SEAL. Caldwell's breath hitched in his throat. His stomach plummeted into an endless, icy void. He looked at her face, seeing the dark purple bruise on her jaw, and then looked at the trident. The realization hit his nervous system like a localized earthquake. He hadn't hit a contractor. He had struck a decorated combat veteran, a chief petty officer, and one of the deadliest human beings on the planet. "Captain Pearson, Caldwell started, his voice suddenly an octave higher than normal. "Shut your mouth, Lieutenant, and assume the position of attention," Pearson barked, his voice cracking like a whip. Caldwell's heels slammed together. He locked his knees, his eyes staring straight ahead, sweat immediately beading on his forehead. Captain Hayes stepped forward, closing the distance until he was mere inches from Caldwell's face. Hayes didn't yell. He spoke in a whisper that filled the entire room. "Lieutenant Gregory Caldwell," Hayes began, holding up a manila folder. "I am Captain Hayes, commander of the Naval Special Warfare Task Group. I have spent the last 30 minutes reviewing your personnel file. It's a very impressive collection of supply chain management awards. Do you know what else I was reviewing?" Caldwell swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "No, sir." Hayes snapped his fingers. On the wall behind the desk, a flat-screen monitor flared to life. It was the high-definition security footage from the mess hall. There was no audio, but the picture was crystal clear. It showed Caldwell cutting in line. It showed the coffee spilling. It showed Caldwell grabbing Sarah's arm. It showed her effortlessly breaking his grip without an ounce of aggression. And then it showed Caldwell stepping back, winding up, and brutally striking her across the face. The video looped, playing the strike over and over again in damning silence. "You initiated physical contact," Hayes whispered, dissecting the footage like a surgeon. "She applied a standard defensive release. You then escalated to aggravated assault against a fellow service member. A service member, I might add, who had just returned from a 72-hour classified operation where she saved the lives of 3 American hostages. She took your hit, Lieutenant, because retaliating would have compromised an active Tier 1 intelligence asset. Sir, I didn't know, Caldwell stammered, his military bearing crumbling. You didn't know? Pearson roared from behind his desk, finally losing his temper. You didn't know she was a chief? You didn't know she was a SEAL? That does not matter, Caldwell. You do not strike anyone on my base. You let your fragile, pathetic ego override your oath as a commissioned officer. Hayes stepped back, letting Pearson's rage fill the room before delivering the final fatal blow to Caldwell's career. I have sworn statements from Petty Officer Miller and Seaman Recruit Davis, Hayes said, dropping 2 pieces of paper onto the desk. Your own men sold you out, Caldwell. They detailed your unprovoked attack and your subsequent order to file a false report. You committed assault under Article 128 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You made false official statements under Article 107, and your behavior constitutes conduct unbecoming an officer under Article 133. Caldwell's face was ashen. His legs were shaking so violently he could barely remain standing. Captain, please. I'll apologize. I'll resign my commission. You will not resign, Lieutenant, Hayes cut him off. Because we are not letting you quietly slip away to the civilian sector. You are being stripped of your logistics command, effective immediately. You will be confined to your quarters under armed guard. Tomorrow morning, you will be flown back to Norfolk, where you will face a general court-martial. Caldwell looked like he was going to vomit. His eyes darted to Sarah, silently pleading with her. He expected to see triumph in her eyes. He expected a smirk, a gloating stare, some sign that she was reveling in his destruction. But Sarah Jenkins just looked at him with the exact same dead, emotionless stare she had given him in the mess hall. He wasn't a conquered enemy to her. He wasn't even a rival. He was just a mistake that the military machine was currently correcting. Chief Jenkins, Captain Pearson said, his tone shifting to one of profound respect. Are you satisfied with these actions? Yes, sir, Sarah replied, her voice steady and clear. The trash is taking itself out. Caldwell flinched as if he had been struck. Master-at-Arms, Pearson called out. The heavy oak doors opened, and the exact same 2 MPs that Caldwell had sent on a wild goose chase stepped into the room. They looked at Caldwell, realizing with dawning horror and amusement who the real target was. Escort the lieutenant to his quarters, confiscate his electronics, his ID, and his sidearm. He is not to speak to anyone, Pearson ordered. The MPs grabbed Caldwell by the arms. The logistics officer, who had woken up that morning feeling like a king, was dragged out of the office a broken, ruined man. Sarah watched him go, feeling no satisfaction, only the lingering exhaustion in her bones. The door clicked shut. Captain Hayes turned to her, his harsh demeanor softening just a fraction. Go to medical, get that jaw documented, and then get some sleep, Chief. We have another target package hitting the desk in 48 hours. Aye, sir, Sarah said. She offered a sharp, flawless salute to the 2 captains, did an about-face, and walked out of the office. The storm was over. The ghost was going back to work. If this story of unyielding discipline and ultimate justice kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for more intense real-life military stories and dramatic encounters. Drop a comment below on what you thought of the lieutenant's massive mistake and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload.